That phrase is going to stick in my head for a long time now. He hath borne our sorrows, our pain, our struggles. He bears the heavy burdens that we are saddled with our entire life. Thank you again, choir, for your amazing contributions. Let's give them a hand clap. Pray with me, please, church. God, thank you for this time that we have together. Thank you for your words, for your messages, and for your truth that you lay out for us. Let us have eyes to see and ears to hear and strength to absorb and act on the message we receive from you. Amen. Well, church, we are continuing through our journey in this season of Lent, our exploration of the concept of endurance. Over the past several weeks, we have seen how endurance plays a key role in several aspects of our faith. This week, we are looking at the interaction between endurance and obedience. I can almost feel the collective recoil from that word, obedience. What image does that portray to you? The word obedience. It's a word that nobody really wants to think about. It triggers our defenses and drives us to a certain level of discomfort. Nobody likes being told that they must obey. And it's no wonder that we have this kind of reaction to this word. Over the entire existence of humanity, that word obey has been used as a cudgel, a weapon, a tool of oppression, and of forced submission, both within the church and outside of the church. It creates feelings of fear, suppression, and it stifles our self-expression. Look into your mind and find the picture of what your first reaction is when I say the word obedience. Now tell me, does it inspire feelings and images of freedom and empowerment? Or does it bring up the phrase, because I told you so? If you're at all like me, it's that second one. Restriction and control. Growing up, I was always told, respect your elders. Now, it was never explicitly stated what that meant, but it very quickly became clear that respect your elders meant obey your elders without question. It didn't take long for me to get that message, that when matters of faith or morality or anything really were presented to me, I was supposed to accept and absorb them at face value with no questions. Because other people have already figured it out for you. They already solved the problem. You just have to learn what the solution is, what their solution is. Because you know, they know better than you do. This is the truth, is what they tell you. This is the only truth. And all other perspectives are just plain wrong. And if they're not just wrong, they're inspired by Satan himself. And sadly, we see that perspective infusing every aspect of our society and even infusing the way the church behaves. Hundreds of churches in the Methodist denomination are disaffiliating. And it's easy to think, that's fine. We don't need them. They don't believe the same way we do. But isn't that what we're trying to fight against? This blind level of obedience of do it because I told you to. Do what we say without question or face the consequences. And yes, the same is coming from the other side as well. Many of those churches who are disaffiliating refuse to be affiliated with us just because we don't believe the same way they do. And therefore, we are wrong. That idea that goes throughout everywhere, this idea of blind obedience destroys rather than empowers. And it's exactly why we need to have this uncomfortable conversation about this word obedience. Because whether we want to acknowledge it or not, the pain of a restrictive view on obedience destroys families, churches, denominations, and countries. And like Kirsty has said many times from this pulpit, we are a church that challenges. Our goal is to take what we know, challenge it, and allow ourselves to grow into new and greater life. To push against stagnation in what we believe, and to open ourselves to conviction instead of conformity, to truth instead of tradition. And this week we are staring obedience in the face, and we are challenging what we know about this word. Because obedience does not have to be stifling and restrictive. It can be liberating. Obedience can be empowering. It can be transformative. This is the perspective that I would like for us to embrace today. Let our eyes see, let our ears hear, and let our minds explore a new understanding of obedience, one where we can enter into a deeper relationship with God and with each other, and where we are empowered to live and act out our faith with courage and conviction. This pain of blind obedience can hit us very hard, even when we think we're avoiding it, because we are constantly being told what the right thing to do is by our parents, our teachers, our pastors, our politicians. Everybody has the right way of doing it, and you're expected to do it that way or you're wrong. It invades every aspect of our lives and every minute of our day. Park here, don't park there. Eat here, don't eat there. You can talk now, don't talk then. It can get exhausting trying to manage all these standards and expectations. And all for what? To make sure that somebody else feels good or comfortable? It can get heavy, wearisome, burdensome to bear the responsibility of a vast array of rules just in order to survive or to make a minor step of progress in your own life. This pressure destroyed me. I grew up as a missionary kid in Mexico. From the age of 8 till I graduated high school, I lived in Mexico as a missionary kid. And I grew up down there with this restrictive view on obedience. I had to adhere to a strict set of rules so that I could be a good role model for all my younger siblings as the oldest child. I had to follow a set of rules so that I could be a good son to my missionary parents. And I had to follow these restrictions so that I could shed a good light on my parents' ministry. It was a heavy, heavy burden. And it wasn't one that I asked for, but it was still one that I was told to carry. And it grew heavier year after year after year. Even after I moved out, I still tried to hold on to those same rules, and they just built and built and became heavier and heavier until eventually I collapsed under the weight. In December of 2011, I felt like my life was collapsing around me. I had been evicted from my apartment. I was jobless. I was broke. And I had no one to turn to. And so I moved here to Nebraska where my parents were living because it was the only option I had, was to move back in with my parents. I tried my entire life to follow all these rules that were set out for me. I tried to follow them, to never question, to never look outside what I was told to do. So why hadn't I succeeded? Where was my reward? Why had everything been taken from me? This prescriptive nature of the obedience that I had been taught had given me a framework of do this and you get that. Do that and you get this. And as a result, when I got hit with unexpected trials and tribulations, I didn't know what to do. I wasn't trained on those situations. It wasn't the content that had been presented to me my entire life. And so when it all happened, I was completely lost. And instead of being able to adapt, instead of being able to grow, I cracked like a dry stick. And to be fully honest, I left the faith at that point. I felt like I couldn't trust this God that had been presented to me. And so I abandoned him. I abandoned the church. I went out on my own. Because if this wasn't going to work, I had to find something else. I had had enough. If I'm doing everything right and following all the rules and that wasn't going to help, what was? I didn't know how to grow. I didn't know how to bend. I didn't know how to adapt. And the unfortunate thing is we need trials for that. We need trials to grow. We need to learn in order to grow. As the saying goes, no pain, no gain. You need trials and tribulations in order to grow. But without the freedom to learn from these trials and tribulations, these trials will simply crush us, leave us with no hope, and a deep desire to make sure things never change again. And so we adopt more rules. And we double down on the heavy burden that just destroyed us. So then 10, 20, 30 years down the road, some fresh new face comes into play in the community and starts to propose what feels like radical ideas because they're not what we expected. They're not in the rule set that we've set up. Radical ideas like the fact that maybe, we do still struggle with some isms. Radical ideas like maybe when we're not using this building, we can let other people use the building. And when you've learned to be purely rigid in your thinking, it feels like an attack, like someone is trying to introduce danger to the church, like they aren't considering the safety of the church, like they aren't accepting the great and heavy burden of running the church according to all the rules. And I can appreciate that desire to follow the rules. I love rules. Rules give you safety. Rules feel safe. They give you some level of control. And as a perfectionist, I want everything to fall into place exactly the way I want it. I want to be able to take all my notes from doing a sermon like this and be able to express every single one of them exactly the way I want to. But I can't. I had verses that I wanted to reference with this sermon. I cut them out because it didn't work. It wasn't part of the flow. I had to grow and learn that, this verse is good, but it doesn't fit with this message. So let's change. Let's adapt. Let's grow and let's learn. But an attack on the rules can feel like an attack on the faith itself. But let's look at the grain of wheat in today's gospel message. That grain of wheat knows one thing. It knows that it's a grain of wheat on a stalk of wheat. But one day it starts to feel like something is changing. The stalk is changing, the weather's changing, and now it feels like you're being pulled or pushed by something. You don't know what. But you can feel yourself drifting away from the stalk. You can feel yourself falling away from the stalk. It's terrifying. But what are you supposed to do? You know the stalk. You love the stalk. The stalk has supported you. The stalk gave you everything you needed. You want to be with the stalk, and you don't want anything to change. Yet here is life changing around you. And you can struggle against the flow of nature and do your absolute darndest to stay attached to that stalk all you want. But still, the world changes. As that grain of wheat, you now have an option. Do you continue with straining against something that you can't stop? To continue with the heavy burdens, the rigid rules and regulations, without the following, without questions, the adherence to tradition. It's familiar, but the longer we go on, the more tradition gets added on, the more rules get created, and the heavier that burden becomes. Or do we go with option 2, taking the light burden that Jesus offers us, letting him take the heavy burden? Take on Jesus' light burden, a burden that frees us from the weight of tradition and expectations. It frees us from outdated rules, and it gives us the freedom to ask questions and to discover. Is it scary? You betcha. It is scary, because you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't have the security of knowing that everything has to follow the rules so you know what to expect. But this is where we can learn and start to grow. Because when we look at this word obedience, I want to take another look at it. And I want to find out, what exactly does obedience mean? I've heard it growing up. When's the last time I looked it up in a dictionary? It's been a long time. So I looked it up and traced it back to find out what exactly is the core of this concept of obedience. It ends up being defined as to conform or comply with, or to follow the commands or guidance of. Now, why would somebody want to conform, comply, or follow the commands or guidance of anything or anyone? A couple of years ago, I noticed my dryer was acting strangely. I threw my clothes in the dryer, set it for the 60-minute cycle or whatever, and when I opened up the dryer, the clothes were still wet. Slightly warm, but they were still wet. So I'm like, this is strange. So I set it through, ran it again. Same thing, ran it again. Ran it 3 or 4 times before finding that underneath the clothes were still wet, but on top the clothes were starting to melt. So I'm like, what the heck is going on here? So I finally set it for one more cycle, and I did that thing where you hit the start button and then you have to open the door and check really fast to see what's going on. Turns out the drum wasn't spinning at all. So all the clothes underneath weren't getting any benefit, and the ones on top were getting blasted with way too much heat. And now, here I was panicking, because I'm not a home appliance repairman. I don't know the first thing about home appliances. And what my brain was telling me was that I had failed because I didn't maintain it properly. I didn't follow the proper rules of dryer maintenance. I had a choice to accept the burden, the heavy burden of self-blame, resignation, and a heavy level of spending to just straight up replace the dryer. I could have followed that first thought, that belief in traditional obedience, where you failed, so you have to start over, and you have to suffer the consequences. I could have just said I was a failure for not maintaining it correctly, and I could have just spent the hundreds of dollars to replace the dryer. That would have been easy, because that's what's expected. On the other hand, there was a slight glimmer of hope, a voice in my head urging me to ask questions, to seek understanding, and to challenge what my brain told me at first. So at that moment, I decided to move away from accepting defeat. And I decided to ask questions. And so I turned to my closest friend in times of uncertainty like this, Google. Through some simple questions, some questions that I allowed myself to ask, I started to grow and I started to unravel what was happening with my dryer. What had started as a heavy and wearisome burden, a broken dryer, became a light and enriching burden as I learned how my dryer functioned, what causes issues like this, and finally, that I didn't actually have to pay hundreds of dollars to replace it. All I needed was $15 to replace the drum belt. And there was a video of a guy who has the training, who knows that machine. And he explained exactly how you replace this belt. And so I learned from him, followed those instructions, knowing that he's already been through this, and he's seen this, and he's done this. And by learning from him and growing, I was able to replace the drum belt on my dryer. And now 2 years later, my dryer is still working. Because true obedience is not just about blindly following the rules and instructions that you have already learned long ago. It's about constantly learning, growing, and adapting. It's about embracing a posture of humility and curiosity, recognizing that we don't have all the answers, and being open to seeking them out and finding them. Those who cling to their attachments of the past, to the heavy burdens of tradition, will eventually lose their grasp on life. But those who are willing to let go, in the words of the gospel, to even hate that old life of tradition and rules for the sake of rules, those who are willing to let that go and embrace the newness of life of uncertainty and the opportunities for growth and learning that it brings, they will find true fulfillment and abundance. However, I do want to acknowledge that traversing into this unknown does come with a level of uncertainty. Jesus invites us to take his yoke, promising us rest and a lighter burden. But what he does not promise is a life devoid of challenges, discomfort, or stress. Growth and learning do not happen without challenge, discomfort, or stress. Again, no pain, no gain. And this is where endurance plays its part. Endurance, being able to stand in the face of this uncertainty, to be able to hold your ground even though you don't know, to be able to take a step forward and push through the uncertainty, to learn, to find, to seek, to grow. That single grain of wheat needs to fall into uncertainty. It needs to fall into some darkness in order to ultimately bear fruit. Now, remember before how I said that when I first moved here to Nebraska, I completely lost my faith. I came back to it. That's why I'm here today. But why did I come back? I opened myself up to the idea of a learning obedience. That's what saved me. I had decided to keep on reading and keep on looking, knowing that there has to be something out there, and I have to find it. Keep seeking, keep finding. And what I discovered came from, of all people, an avowed atheist. This author presented this concept that humans are imbued with the goodness of creation, that humanity has inherent worth and inherent value just because we have been created. Goodness comes from somewhere. It comes from the Creator. And it is imbued in every single one of us. It was a mind-blowing moment for me because not only does it encourage me, this reminder that God did in fact create me in God's image with the imago Dei inside of me, in the essence of God in the core of my being, but it also provides a solid base for me to learn from. Because that same author taught me that growth is life. In fact, she said, anything that does not grow is dead. If it doesn't grow, it's dead. It's a basic fact of life. Growth is a constant process, though, a continual journey. It's not a one and done. You don't grow to a certain point and then stop. It's just always something new to learn and something to grow into. And this journey of learning, of growth, requires endurance. The endurance to release our stranglehold on the rules. The endurance to accept that we don't have the control that we thought we did. The endurance to let Jesus handle the heavy things that we can't handle. And the endurance to continue seeking more opportunities to learn and grow while knowing that this journey will never stop. Now, we have two perspectives on obedience here. One, a strict adherence to the familiar in order to control, hold secure, and prevent unknown/unwanted change. Option two, doing what we are called to do, to learn and grow even while we're uncomfortable, knowing that Jesus has all the heavy stuff taken care of. Which one of those sounds more inviting? Which one of those sounds more empowering? Which one of those sounds more like the healthy, emotionally stable parent? By enduring learning, we are participating in God's transformative process in the world. By enduring with this obedience, we learn how God's work is transforming the world and how we can use our prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness to join in that transformation. By enduring with obedience, we submit ourselves to God in the same way that Jesus submitted himself as he stepped into the unknown desert in order to grow. The very reason we celebrate Lent. This new obedience, this learning, is not just a one-time decision, though, but a continual surrendering of our will to that of God, even when we enter into unfamiliar territory. Why? Because God said so? No. Because we have seen that Jesus has gone through the same. We have seen the same in the life of Jesus. Jesus has gone through struggle. He's gone through loss, trauma, pain, death. And he has always come back. Even through death, he came back. We see that he accepted the new. He learned and he grew. And we accept that maybe he does know more than us. Maybe Jesus is a little bit wiser than us. And maybe we can actually learn from him. Obedience is not simply following the rules. Obedience is learning from the best so that we can be better and so that we can make the world a better place. Because we know that working together, the best is truly yet to come. Thanks be to God.